Hello, welcome to episode 57 of the Datapack tutorial series for version 1.21. We're going to be doing player personal data storage. Now, similar to like a scoreboard, you can save scores on a player, and that's personal to them, but you can only store integers. So we're going to do the same with data storage. Now, the problem with data storage is, let's say there's my little bucket, that's my data storage, and I'm going to say it's ID data, because that's what we use for the tutorials. And let's say this is going to be the coordinates of my home coordinates. And I come along and I set my home, there's my data, purple for me, and that's great. And then later on I say, oh, teleport me home, and it comes into the storage and it goes, oh, these are the coordinates, and off I go. But then Minion comes along and saves their home, and now when I run it, it gets Minion's coordinates. That is not going to be good. So we don't want this one bucket. What we want is a nice bucket with a never-ending line. I can't even make a line. Off it goes for every player. Mine will be stored here, Minions will be stored there, and then everyone else's. So then when I come to access my home, I come down and I get my data. Don't get Minions, I get mine. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to use an ID system. If you want a simple version of that, you can look at Command Block Series episode 205. Something I think this would be used for would be setting homes. And we're going to be using this at some point for projects in the future, which is why we're going to do it now by itself. Maybe you wanted to get the player's name. I think in episode 33 of the Datapack series, we were getting the player's name. If you were going to do that a lot, it'd be easier just to get the player's name once. And then you could store it into their personal storage and just pull it from there whenever you wanted. Anyway, let's get on with setting up players with their own personal storage. I think we'll start in VS Code like we normally do, and we'll add all the files and folders. So in my namespace, I'll need a new folder for an advancement. And in there, I will have a new file, and I call it first join. Okay, that's going to run at the player when they first join, funnily enough. And it's going to run a function, which is going to assign them an ID and a bit of space in data storage. Let's make a new folder inside function. And this is where I'm going to put my functions just to keep them tidy. And we'll have some new files. We'll have data get. Okay, we'll have a data get macro. We'll have data set. And you can probably guess, oh, I don't want a folder, sorry. You can probably guess the next one. Data set macro. Let's put a reset in as well, just in case we want to use it for testing. Reset. We'll need a player join or a first join, so let's make that something that advancement can run. First join. And we'll need a load and a tick. I think we've got everything we need there. Yeah, and load and tick. Okay, right, we'll start off with load because we need some scores. I want a score to store the player's ID, and I want a trigger that they can run themselves. So we'll do scoreboard, objectives, add, ID, dummy. That'll be their identification number. And scoreboard, objectives, add, set data, which is going to be a trigger. And then they can use that to type a number in, and that number will be stored into their personal storage. Let's save that. Let's shut down all the windows. Right, next I think we'll do our advancement. We'll pop over to misode because it'll just be a little bit quicker. Criteria, we'll just call it first join as well. First join. Let's add that. Its trigger is going to be ticking, so it's a tick. And its reward will be to run a function, which I will just call placeholder for now. I'm going to copy that, take it back to VS Code, pop it into my advancement, and I'm going to change that placeholder to start typing my namespace, first join. Okay, so it's going to be ticking all the time. So when a new player joins, it's going to go, aha, new player. It will grant them this advancement, which will run first join as that player, and we're not going to revoke it, so it's only going to run for them once. Let's do the first join as well. So in here, we will clear some temporary data, clear temp data, We will assign the player an ID. We will assign some storage to them, and we will enable the trigger so they can use it. Okay, clear temp data. Data, remove. Gotta love my spelling there. Remove from storage. ID data is what we always use. Temporary. Now let's assign them a score or an ID. Execute. Execute. Store result as a score for the player into their ID. Okay, so we're going to do something at the end of this command, and we're going to store the result of that into the player's ID, but we're also going to store the result into storage ID data temporary dot ID as an integer, times it by 1. So what are we going to store into those two places? We're going to store the result of this command, run scoreboard players add. I need a fake player. I'm just going to call them new. ID 1. So a player joins. Let's say they're the first player ever to join. New ID score would probably be equal 0 at the moment. So we add 1 to that. New ID now equals 1. We will store that 1. Well, we will times that 1 by 1. So it's still going to be 1. And then we'll store it into ID data temporary ID. And we'll store it into the player's ID score. Now we'll assign them a little bit of storage. We will data modify storage, ID data. We'll store it into players, and we will append, because we want to add to the list of existing players, from storage, ID data, temporary. Well, that didn't also fill that, did it? Temporary. And we'll enable the trigger for them. Scoreboard, players, enable at s set data. Okay, let's pop over here. And if I press this button here, it's just doing the reload. There we go. Let's see how I press it. There we are. 2 reloads. Okay, let's do scoreboard objective set display to the sidebar ID. Well, I don't have an ID and Minion doesn't have an ID. This might be from testing, where we both probably already have the advancement. Obviously, if you haven't been doing testing, you won't. So let's just see if that is the problem. Advancement, revoke for all players only. ID, yeah, I think I still got the advancement. There we go. That was just from testing earlier. You won't have that problem. So we've got the ID. I've been given 1 and Minion's been given 2. Probably because I joined the world first. It's pretty random and it really doesn't matter. Anyway, we don't need to see that on the sidebar anymore, so let's get rid of that. And let's check our data storage. Data, get from storage, ID data. And here we can see we've got the temporary ID, which we stored for each person, currently left on Minions. And we've got players. And we've got 1 player here whose ID is 1. So that's me. My data is going to get stored in there. And we've got 1 player here whose ID is 2. So that's Minion. Minion's data is going to get stored in there. Okay. Let's pop back to VS Code. I think probably next we want to set some data. So let's get the tick. We'll use the tick to check when the player uses the trigger. So we'll execute as all players whose scores equals set data equals 1 or higher. And at s, I don't think I need to do at s because I'm not doing anything at their location. We'll put it in anyway. Run function, and we'll do data set. Save that. Okay, now we're going to have to remember to re-enable that trigger. Let's go off to data set. In here, we want to store the player's ID. Store ID to temporary storage. We want to process, or we'll put save the data. Save the data and enable trigger. Let's store the player's ID. execute store result to storage ID data. We store it to somewhere temporary dot ID as an integer. We'll times it by 1. We'll run scoreboard players get at s ID. So I'm going to get the player's ID and I'm going to store it into ID data temporary ID. Now I'm going to function dataset macro with storage ID data temporary. So inside this function I will have access to everything inside temporary, which means I have access to that ID. And we'll enable the triggers. Scoreboard players. Well, first we'll reset the trigger and then we'll enable it. Okay, save. That looks good. Off to the macro where we have access to the player's ID because we've passed that across. In here, what do we want to do? First, I want to store the value that they put into the trigger command. So when they do trigger set data set, and here they type a number, I'm going to type, what did I get? 498. Okay, 498. I want to grab that number and save it. So we will, oops. So we want to store trigger value to temp. Then we want to save to player storage, and we'll send the player a message as well. I'm going to send all players a message, so when we run the function as minion, we can still see the result. I think normally you just send it to the one player. We'll do that when we get to it. Okay, set data macro. Execute, store, result, into storage, ID data, temporary, dot, we'll call it test data, as an integer, times it by 1, run scoreboard, scoreboard, players, get, at s, set data. So I think I had 498 or something. That's going to grab that number that they typed in using the trigger, and it's going to save it into there. Now let's put that into player storage. Data, modify, storage, ID data, players. I'm going to just say player 0 for now, and we'll turn this into a little macro in a minute. Dot test data, set from storage ID data temporary dot test data. Okay, but it might not be me. It might be minion. So we need to say here which player it is. We're going to open and close curlies. We're going to say ID colon. We're going to do $, open and close normal brackets, and in here we'll use ID. That is the ID that I am passing across here that we got from the player. Okay, and now it's not happy because we need to say you are using data that was passed to you. Okay, now let's do a message. Tell raw. Here you'd probably want to do at s, so it just tells the one person. I'm going to tell everyone, and I'm going to have, what should we do? Should we just, let's do something a bit interesting. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. This one will be text, let's say player, and then we'll want to get their ID. We can get their ID from their score, so this will be a score. Here we'll type score. What is the player's name? It's the player executing this function. What objective do you want to get? I want to get their ID. Here we'll just have another little bit of text. Set to, and here we want to get that temporary data. So it's going to be from storage and what MBT. So we'll say it's from storage. The storage it's from will be ID data, and the MBT we want to get, we saved it into temporary test data, temporary dot test data. Save. Okay, let's pop back. Let's reload. Let's look at the data. What have we got in there? Okay, I've got 1 and 2. So 1 is me, 2 is minion. I will run the trigger. Trigger, set data, set to, what did I get? 456 that time. Okay, let's look at the data. So now we have something a bit different. We can ignore temporary because that's all the temporary stuff that we're just popping in, and we're looking in the players. Now we have a list of players, an array of players, and here's mine, ID 1, and I now have test data stored in there as well. Cool. Minion doesn't. Okay, what happens if minion runs the function or the trigger? So minion's going to do trigger set data set to, let's say, a random number. Player 2 set to 657. Okay, let's check our data again. And we look in the player array. My test data is 456 for ID 1 and test data 657 for ID 2. Nice. Okay, so that's good. We could also run the function ourselves as minion. So they don't have to run it themselves. That's no problem. I wonder if we could actually run their trigger as themselves. I've never tried that. Execute as infernal minion run trigger set data set to 111. Player 2. It does say player 2, so that seemed to work. Let's check the data. My data is still 456 and minion's data is 111. Okay, so we're setting the data into our personal storage. Let's get the data back again. So let's close those two and let's go to data get. What do we want to do here? We want to, well, we need the ID of the player. So actually from data set, we're already storing the ID. So let's just copy that to start with. Copy. And we'll put that in the top there. So we're getting their ID. And then we get the data. Okay. So we want to call get the data with temporary so we can have access to the ID. So let's do that. Function functino. Function data get macro with storage ID data temporary. Okay, because inside temporary we have access now to the ID inside this function. Okay, I think that's all we need for the data get. Let's save that. Let's pop over to data get macro. In here, what are we going to do? We're going to get the data and save it to, let's get data and save to temporary. And I suppose then we want to be able to see the data, don't we? So let's just display a message. Message. Let's get the data first. Data modify storage ID data temporary. What shall I call it? Data. Set from storage ID data players. Open and close. We'll start by saying player 0, and we're getting their test data. Let's save that. Okay, now we just need to do the same as what we did in the data set macro. We can see we're using this little bit here. So let's copy that from there. Why not? And let's just get rid of that 0, replace it. Open curly brackets, ID colon, $, open normal brackets, ID, and then close both those bracket sets. It's unhappy because it needs to know it's using data that's been passed to it. And now let's do a message. So tell raw, we'll do it for all players. Again, you'd probably just want to do this for the one player. And we'll have 2 entries. We'll have some text. Text will say result, and then we want to get something from storage here. So can you get something from storage, please? I want you to get it from ID data, And the MBT path is, where did we save it? We saved it into temporary data. Okay, let's grab it from there. Bump. Let's save that. Let's go back. Let's do a reload. Okay, so I don't need trigger. I'm going to run the function. Function. Oh, that was some spelling there, wasn't it? Data get. Result 456. I ran the function, so it pulled out my result. If minion runs the function, data get, that pulls out minion's result. Or if I execute as minion run function data get, I get minion's result. Now, it should work. Minion's gone. They've left the game, they've had enough, they're tired, their mum's telling them off, get to bed, you've got school tomorrow. And we can still, well, we can't execute as Infernal Minion now, but if we know their ID, we can still get their data, and we still have access. Storage, get ID data. We still have access to their data there. So we can scroll through or iterate through the array and find out information about players. Because at the moment we're only storing IDs, there would be nothing to stop us storing the player name as well, and their UUID, and their spawn point, their bed location, anything you want. Okay, should we do let's do a reset. Let's get Minion back. Come back, Minion. Hello. Where are you gazing off into the sky? Let's do a reset. Just in case anyone wants one. I don't need one because we seem to have got away with it. So what we're going to do, let's remove the scoreboards. Remove scoreboards. Then we'll clear storage. Then we'll add the scoreboards back. Seems a bit strange. But if we remove the scoreboards, it's going to remove everyone's ID. So that way you can affect offline players. Removing the scoreboards will remove it from offline players as well. And then we're going to add the scoreboards back. And revoke the advancement, I suppose, for everyone. Remove scoreboards. So what do we want? Scoreboard, objectives, remove, ID. Scoreboard, objectives, remove, set data. Add the scoreboards. Well, I might as well just go to load and copy those from load. Copy. Put them back in there. Clear the storage. Data. Remove. From storage. ID data. And we've got temporary. Stop that. Data. Remove. From storage. ID data, and we've got players, and that should remove everything. And let's revoke the advancement. Advancement, revoke for all players, only ID first join. Okay, save. Let's go back, just do a little test of it. Let's have a look at our storage data. Yeah. Okay, let's do a reset. Well, we'll have to do a reload first. Let's do a reset. Function. Reset. Let's look at the data. Okay, data's set back to, it would have been set to empty, and our advancement was revoked. So it would have gone tick, and then it would have said, hey, Infernal Device was the first player to join the server. He doesn't have this advancement. And then it would have granted me an ID, and it would have granted me a little bit of space in personal storage. And then it would have ticked onto Infernal Minion and would have said, well, you don't have the advancement. And it would have done the same for them. So we've reset and everything's gone back to empty. Cool. Okay. I think we've been long enough on that one. We're going to be using that at some point. Probably we'll do maybe a set homes where you can set 3 different homes or something. And then teleport between them. I wouldn't mind redoing something like the portal bow using data storage instead of using entities, because if you teleport away, the entity is going to be left. And the same would go for the book that we dropped with coordinates. And then it opened a one-time portal to those coordinates. All of these things would be better if we were using the data storage instead of using entities and just leaving entities lying all over the map. Anyway, I've kept you long enough. Get ready for New Year's Eve. If you're doing anything exciting, have fun. If you're not doing anything exciting, have fun as well. Have a quiet night in. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.